Grant Langford slammed a printed document onto the conference table so hard that half the room jumped. "This looks like a breach of ethics, Alison." His voice carried across the packed room, loud enough that every conversation stopped mid-sentence. 20 pairs of eyes swung toward me like I'd just confessed to murder. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the document I'd never seen before in my life. The header showed my name, my signature, my employee ID number. But the content? I had no memory of approving anything like this. Grant leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, that smooth confidence radiating off him like cologne. "We're escalating this to internal audit immediately," he announced, and the room seemed to tilt sideways. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no words came out. Everyone was already whispering, already deciding I was guilty. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. Grant had been planning this for months. I barely made it back to my office before my hands started shaking. The door clicked shut behind me, and I collapsed into my desk chair, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My reflection looked back at me from the dark monitor, pale and hollow-eyed. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. 6 years at Halston Technologies, 6 years of fixing broken systems and earning people's trust, and it had taken Grant exactly 30 seconds to destroy all of it. I thought about that document with my signature at the bottom, the one he'd waved around like evidence of my corruption. How had he even gotten it? My inbox pinged, jolting me from my thoughts. The subject line made my stomach drop: Internal Audit Kickoff Meeting, Friday 9 a.m., attendance mandatory. They were moving fast. Too fast. Which meant Grant had prepared them in advance. This wasn't spontaneous outrage. This was a calculated execution, and I'd been too stupid to see it coming. My name is Alison Tate, and 6 months ago, I thought I understood how this company worked. I'd spent 6 years at Halston Technologies as a senior operations analyst, the person they called when vendor contracts got messy or procurement processes broke down. I wasn't flashy, but I was reliable. People trusted me to untangle complicated problems without creating drama. That reputation was exactly what made me useful to Grant Langford. He'd been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Partnerships 8 months earlier, riding in on promises of aggressive growth and innovative vendor relationships. Everyone talked about how dynamic he was, how he was going to shake things up. I should have recognized the warning signs in that kind of language. Dynamic usually meant reckless. Innovative usually meant cutting corners. But I'd been too busy doing my job to pay attention to office politics. That ignorance nearly destroyed my career. The first time Grant pulled me into his office was 6 months ago, right after the company announced they were bidding on a massive government contract. He'd smiled that practiced smile of his and gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Alison, I need someone I can trust," he'd said, closing the door with deliberate care. "We've got a vendor situation that's time-sensitive and frankly, a bit delicate. You're the only one with the technical knowledge to handle it properly." I'd felt a small surge of pride at being singled out. Grant handed me a thick folder filled with contracts and compliance documents. "I've already signed off on the framework," he explained, tapping a page where his signature sat bold and confident. "I just need you to verify the vendor specifications and route it through procurement." It seemed straightforward enough. Looking back, I realized that was the moment he'd started building his trap, and I'd walked right into it without a second thought. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became routine. Grant would call me into rushed meetings, always at odd hours when the office was quieter. He'd hand me contracts and vendor agreements that needed immediate attention, always with that same urgent energy. "Don't worry about the executive approvals," he'd say with a dismissive wave. "I'll handle the top-level stuff. You just focus on the technical details." I wanted to push back, to insist on following proper channels, but every time I hesitated, Grant would lean forward with concern in his eyes. "Alison, I chose you because you understand how things really work," he'd say. "Sometimes we have to cut through red tape to get things done. That's how you move up in this company." So I told myself this was normal, that maybe I'd been too rigid in my thinking. Maybe this was just how executives operated when they were moving fast. I ignored the knot in my stomach that tightened every time I signed something without proper documentation. 3 months ago, the rumors started circulating about Grant's next promotion. People whispered in elevators and break rooms that he was being considered for chief operating officer. Suddenly, his aggressive timeline made perfect sense. He wasn't just trying to land the government contract, he was trying to prove he deserved the executive suite. I stood in the elevator one morning, pretending not to listen as two senior managers discussed Grant's chances. If he closes this vendor deal, he's a lock for COO, one of them said. The other nodded knowingly. Langford's a closer. He gets things done. I thought about all those rushed contracts I'd been processing, all those signatures Grant had pushed me to provide. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Was I helping him succeed, or was I helping him hide something? That afternoon, I reviewed an email chain about a vendor contract I'd supposedly approved. There was a disclaimer I'd added about compliance review, a paragraph I distinctly remembered typing. It was gone. Grant had edited it out after I'd sent it. That's when I started paying closer attention. The calendar invites became suspicious, showing up without agendas or context, just vague titles like Quick Check-In or Brief Sync. Grant would loop me into email threads about deals and partnerships, making sure my name appeared on every communication. But then something strange happened. The follow-up emails, the ones where actual decisions got made, suddenly stopped including me. Grant would respond privately to vendors, making commitments and changing terms, but my name stayed attached to the original thread. It was like he was building a paper trail that showed me involved in everything while keeping me ignorant of the actual details. I pulled up my sent folder one evening and traced through 3 months of correspondence. The pattern was undeniable. Grant had been systematically rerouting communication, responding to vendors from his personal email while leaving my name on the official records. I was the face of deals I knew nothing about. I didn't confront him. Instead, I started building my own documentation. Every email that seemed suspicious got blind copied to my personal account. Every document I signed got saved to a thumb drive I kept in my purse. I created a folder on my personal laptop labeled Insurance and filled it with screenshots, saved PDFs, and calendar exports. I felt paranoid doing it, like I was the one doing something wrong. But my instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Then a vendor sent me an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line was innocuous enough, processing fee discussion. But the content was explicit. They were asking about a facilitation payment, a polite term for a bribe. They wanted to know how to structure it so it wouldn't raise flags in our accounting system. I forwarded it to Grant immediately, marking it urgent. He never responded. Not even an acknowledgement that he'd seen it. The vendor sent a follow-up a week later, thanking me for my guidance on the payment structure. I'd never replied to them. The silence around that bribe email grew louder in my mind every day. I started questioning everything. During a staff meeting 2 weeks later, I asked a direct question about budget allocation for vendor relationships. Grant cut me off mid-sentence with a smooth laugh. Let's take that offline, Alison. We don't need to bore everyone with procurement details. The room chuckled politely, but I felt myself being erased. After the meeting, I checked the email thread I'd started about vendor oversight. Grant had removed me from it entirely, continuing the conversation with finance without me. It wasn't just sloppy management anymore. It was intentional. He was isolating me while keeping my name attached to everything he wanted distance from. I stayed late that night, digging through shared drives and archived files. I found vendor agreements I'd supposedly negotiated, with terms I'd never seen. I found invoices approved under my authority that I had no memory of reviewing. Grant wasn't just using me. He was framing me. The breaking point came when HR called me in for what they described as a routine check-in. I walked into the small conference room expecting a performance review or maybe a discussion about my career development. Instead, Grant was sitting there with his arms crossed and that practiced look of concern on his face. The HR director, a woman named Patricia Holbrook, smiled too brightly. Alison, we just want to touch base about some concerns that have been raised. My stomach dropped. Concerns? Grant leaned forward, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I've noticed you've been struggling with follow-through lately. Missing emails, not attending key meetings. I wanted to address it before it became a bigger problem. I stared at him, speechless. He was lying, and doing it so smoothly that Patricia was already nodding along. "We just want to make sure you have the support you need," she said gently, as if I was the one falling apart. They asked careful questions about my role in vendor selection, about my communication with outside contractors. I answered honestly, but I could feel the room shifting against me. By the time I left, Patricia had requested a formal written statement about my responsibilities. Grant had planted his seeds perfectly. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my laptop. I wasn't going to roll over and accept this. If Grant wanted a paper trail, I'd give him one he couldn't manipulate. I spent hours researching corporate compliance procedures, reading case studies about internal investigations, understanding my rights as an employee. Then I did something I'd never imagined I'd need to do. I reached out to an external compliance advisor, someone who'd worked with companies like Halston but wasn't on our payroll. His name was Marcus Chen, a former federal auditor who now consulted on corporate ethics cases. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I showed him everything: the edited emails, the rerouted communications, the suspicious vendor payments. Marcus reviewed my documentation with the careful attention of someone who'd seen this playbook before. When he finally looked up, his expression was serious. "You're sitting on gold here, Alison. If you can prove intent, you've got him." He paused. "But you need to be smart about how you present this. One wrong move and he'll bury you." The internal audit notification arrived exactly when Grant had promised it would. The email was cold and clinical, assigning a lead investigator named Thomas Brennan and requesting that I gather all relevant documents related to vendor management and procurement processes from the past 6 months. I read it twice, feeling the weight of what was coming. Then I smiled. I'd been gathering those documents for weeks. I spent the weekend organizing everything into clear categories. Emails where Grant had edited my work, calendar invites showing his pattern of exclusion, vendor communications I'd never seen, and most importantly, the bribe solicitation I'd forwarded to Grant with his conspicuous lack of response. I created a timeline document that mapped every suspicious incident. I backed everything up in 3 different locations. Monday morning, I dug deeper into archived emails, searching for anything I might have missed. That's when I found it, a buried chain from 2 months ago where Grant had edited contract language after I'd already submitted it for review. He'd changed a compliance clause to remove vendor liability protections, then resubmitted it with my signature still attached to the original submission. The audit team had no idea what they were about to uncover. I saw Grant in the hallway 3 days before my audit interview. He was talking to someone from finance, laughing at some joke, looking completely unbothered by the investigation he triggered. When he spotted me, he broke away from his conversation and walked over with that trademark smirk. "Alison," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "I hope you've been keeping good records. These audit things can get complicated." His tone was friendly, almost sympathetic, but his eyes told a different story. He was testing me, trying to see if I was broken yet. I met his gaze steadily. "I keep very detailed records, Grant. Always have." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. Good. Just want to make sure you're protected." He patted my shoulder like a mentor reassuring a nervous student. I wanted to shake his hand off, to tell him I knew exactly what he was doing. Instead, I smiled. "Thanks for your concern." As he walked away, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The audit team wanted to interview me first, before Grant. That wasn't standard procedure. Something had already caught their attention. Thomas Brennan's office was smaller than I expected, tucked into a corner of the building most people never visited. He was younger than his title suggested, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His colleague, a woman named Angela Torres, sat beside him with a laptop open. They'd asked me to bring any documentation I thought was relevant. I slid the thumb drive across the desk. "This is everything," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite my trembling hands. Thomas plugged in the drive and started clicking through folders. I walked them through the timeline I'd created, showing them the pattern of Grant's behavior. I pointed out the edited emails, the rerouted communications, the suspicious payments. I showed them the bribe solicitation and Grant's non-response. I didn't speculate or add drama. I just presented the facts. Angela stopped typing at one point, staring at her screen with a frown. Why would he sign this version of the contract? She asked, pulling up a document. He removed every protection clause you'd included. Thomas leaned over to look. Their exchange was brief but telling. They saw it too. Over the next week, the tone of internal communications shifted subtly. Email chains that used to flow smoothly suddenly had gaps where messages were being sent privately. I started getting CC'd on notes I wasn't supposed to see, mistakes made by rushed assistants trying to keep up with the sudden volume of audit requests. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from Grant's executive assistant to someone in finance, forwarding a request from the audit team. The subject line said, "Urgent, need original vendor files," and the preview text showed panic. Grant says he can't find the originals and wants to know if you have copies. They were scrambling. The audit had expanded beyond the initial scope. I heard Grant's assistant on the phone through her cubicle wall one afternoon, her voice tight with stress. No, he needs those by end of day. The audit team specifically requested anything with Alison's signature. I kept my head down and kept working, but inside, I felt the first flicker of hope. The investigation wasn't just procedural anymore. They'd found something worth digging deeper. HR, which had been so eager to meet with me before, suddenly became impossible to reach. Patricia Holbrook stopped making eye contact when we passed in the hallway. She'd duck into offices or pretend to be deep in conversation on her phone. The break room, usually full of casual chatter, would go quiet when I walked in. But the whispers that used to sound judgmental had changed tone. People weren't asking if I'd done something wrong anymore. They were asking what Grant had done. The rumor mill, which had turned against me so quickly, was now turning in reverse. Someone had leaked that the audit was focusing on Grant's approval processes. Someone else mentioned that the COO promotion had been quietly postponed. I didn't fuel the gossip. I just did my work and waited. Then Thomas Brennan called my office directly, not through email. "Alison, I wanted to give you a heads up. We found something significant in Grant's email archives. I can't share details yet, but I wanted you to know the focus of this investigation has shifted." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking again, but this time from relief, not fear. 2 days later, the audit team sent me a single file via encrypted email. The subject line was simple: "For your review." I downloaded it with my office door closed and my heart racing. It was an email chain pulled from Grant's sent folder, messages I'd never been included on. The thread started with a vendor named Apex Solutions asking about payment terms. Grant's response made my blood run cold. "Keep this off the official channels," he'd written. "Route everything through Alison Tate's approval queue. She's handling point on this contract. Use her name for all documentation requests." Further down the chain, the vendor asked about a compliance flag I'd supposedly raised. Grant's response: "Ignore that. Alison's just covering her bases. I'll handle any pushback from legal." The final email in the chain had a subject line that made me physically recoil: "FWD, Alison approved." Grant had forwarded vendor communications to their finance team, claiming I'd signed off on terms I'd never even seen. He'd used my name as a shield while making decisions that violated every compliance protocol we had. I'd been right. He'd been framing me all along. The next morning, I found a brown envelope on my desk. No name, no return address, just standard manila paper sealed with tape. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single printed screenshot of a text message conversation. The contact name at the top read, "Apex Mobile." The messages were between Grant and someone whose number I didn't recognize. "Grant, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. Always does. Unknown number, and if she pushes back? Grant, she won't. I've been managing her expectations for months. She thinks she's being helpful." I stared at the screenshot, reading it 3 times. Then I noticed something in the corner of the image, a small detail that changed everything. The phone number had a company extension format. I checked our internal directory. The number belonged to a phone registered to Kyle Patterson, Grant's intern. Someone on Grant's team had turned on him. I made a copy of the screenshot, added it to my documentation folder, and placed the original back in the envelope. Whoever had leaked this was taking a huge risk. I wasn't going to waste their courage. The audit team called Grant in for a second interview on a Thursday afternoon. I wasn't invited, but I watched him walk past my office toward the elevators. His usual confidence had cracked. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He'd swapped his designer suit for something more conservative, like he was trying to look less arrogant. The intern, Kyle, walked with him, carrying a box of files. Their conversation was low and tense. When they disappeared into the elevator, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. An hour passed. Then another. From my desk, I could see the hallway leading to the audit offices. Grant finally emerged 90 minutes after he'd gone in. His tie was loosened. His confident stride had been replaced by something stiffer, more careful. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was sweating. Kyle followed several steps behind, his face carefully neutral. As they passed my office, Grant glanced through my window. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw something I'd never seen in him before, genuine fear. I turned back to my computer and kept working. Whatever had happened in that room, it had shaken him badly. Patricia from HR requested a follow-up meeting with me the next day. The tone of her email was completely different from before, warm and almost apologetic. When I arrived, she was alone, no Grant to corroborate his lies. "Alison, I want to thank you for your cooperation during this process," she began, her smile more genuine than I'd seen from her before. "Your documentation has been incredibly helpful to the investigation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We recognize that this situation has been stressful. We'd like to offer you a lateral transfer to a different department, something that would allow you to move forward with a fresh start." I let the offer hang in the air for a moment. She was trying to sweep this under the rug, to shuffle me away from Grant's division before the scandal got bigger. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly. "But I'm declining." Politely but firmly. Patricia's smile faltered. "Are you sure? It might be more comfortable for everyone involved." "I'm sure," I replied. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not the one who needs to leave." The meeting ended shortly after. The office atmosphere changed overnight. Whispers followed Grant through the halls, and people who'd once sought his attention now kept their distance. I heard fragments of conversation in the break room, at lunch, in the elevator. He'd been removed from the government contract bid team. His name was quietly dropped from upcoming strategy presentations. The promotion everyone had assumed was guaranteed was now officially on indefinite hold. People started approaching me differently too. A few colleagues who'd avoided me since the conference room accusation now stopped by my desk to thank me quietly. "You're handling this with real grace," one senior manager told me. Not everyone would keep their composure. I didn't feel graceful. I felt exhausted. But I also felt vindicated. Then I got a calendar invite that made my stomach flip. The company's legal counsel wanted to speak with me. Not HR, not the audit team. The actual board's legal representatives. This was escalating higher than I'd imagined. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Whatever was happening, it was about to go beyond internal audit. Monday morning arrived with an email that made the entire floor buzz. A company-wide memo from the chief compliance officer, distributed at 8 a.m. sharp. The subject line, Internal Audit Findings, Action Items. I opened it with my coffee halfway to my lips. The memo detailed findings of executive negligence and intentional misrepresentation of procurement processes. It mentioned systemic violations of approval protocols and unauthorized vendor commitments. Names weren't listed, but specific departments were. Grant's division was front and center. The memo concluded with a commitment to enhanced oversight and accountability. By 9 a.m., 3 senior leaders had been placed on administrative review. By noon, Grant's office was being cleared out. I walked past on my way to the legal counsel meeting and saw 2 security personnel boxing up his belongings. His personal photos, his awards, his expensive desk accessories, everything was being packed into standard brown boxes like he'd never mattered. His nameplate was already gone from the door. Kyle, the intern, stood nearby watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. I nodded back, understanding passing between us silently. The story of Grant's downfall spread through our industry faster than I expected. By the end of the week, I heard through former colleagues that his COO offer had been officially rescinded. Instead of a promotion, he was on administrative leave pending legal review. The company was conducting a full forensic audit of every deal he'd touched. Vendors he'd worked with were being contacted for interviews. The scope had grown from my documentation into something much larger. Meanwhile, Kyle Patterson, the intern who'd leaked those text messages, received a quiet promotion to a different team with a substantial raise. The official explanation was that he'd demonstrated strong ethical judgment during a sensitive internal matter. Nobody said it explicitly, but everyone understood what that meant. He'd chosen integrity over loyalty to his boss. The company was rewarding that choice publicly, even if they couldn't acknowledge the details. As for me, I was offered a position that hadn't existed before, Senior Compliance Manager, reporting directly to the Chief Compliance Officer. It came with a significant raise and an office on the executive floor. I accepted. This time, the promotion felt earned. I gave 2 weeks' notice anyway. The job offer was flattering, and part of me wanted to stay and rebuild. But Halston Technologies would always be the place where I'd been publicly humiliated, where I'd spent months wondering if my career was over. I didn't want that shadow following me. Instead, I accepted a position at a competitor, Northbridge Systems. They'd approached me during the investigation, having heard through industry connections about what was happening. My new title was Director of Ethics and Compliance. The CEO sent me a personal welcome note that acknowledged the situation directly. We need leaders who understand that doing the right thing sometimes means standing alone. Welcome to a company that values that courage. My last day at Halston was quiet. I packed my office methodically, taking only what was mine. The Chief Compliance Officer stopped by to shake my hand. "You saved this company from something much worse," he told me. "I hope you know that." I thanked him, but I wasn't staying for gratitude. I was leaving for peace. On my final afternoon, I walked past Grant's old office one last time. It was completely empty now, just blank walls and standard office furniture waiting for whoever came next. No trace remained of the man who tried to destroy me to save his own career. I didn't feel angry looking at that empty space. I didn't feel victorious either. I felt something quieter, something closer to peace. Because I'd learned something crucial through all of this, Grant hadn't destroyed me. I documented everything, trusted my instincts, and refused to be erased. The audit team hadn't taken him down. He'd done that himself with every edited email, every rerouted communication, every lie he thought he'd gotten away with. I just handed them the matches, and he'd lit the fire himself. As I walked out of Halston Technologies for the last time, I thought about the other Allisons out there, the people being set up by their bosses, being used as shields for someone else's corruption. My advice would be simple: know your worth, keep your receipts, and never sign anything without a paper trail. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's simply letting the truth speak for itself.